allowed to give money or guns to terrorist groups. Ask Hamas how that's working out for them. Because the President of the United States continues to sign $440 million worth of money over to the Palestinian Authority unity government, which includes Hamas and Islamic Jihad, State Department-sponsored terrorist organizations. And the State Department has sided with Hamas, with the Palestinian Authority, with Islamic Jihad, called on Israel for restraint against terrorist groups that kidnap young Jewish boys and then proceed to murder them. They're doing this now on the basis of this Palestinian kid who tragically was killed by Jewish extremists. There's a vast difference between the two sides. There are no streets going to be named after these Jewish pathetic pieces of human refuse who engaged in this conduct. They're going to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Every Jew who watched what happened on Sunday when this arrest took place and all this came out felt sick to his stomach. They felt like vomiting and never stopped vomiting. That was not true on the other side. When these 3 Jewish boys were killed, Hamas was celebrating. They ran ads in their newspapers showing these 3 Jewish boys as dead rats. Okay, there is a vast difference between the two sides, but of course this administration, this administration is not interested in any way in cracking down on terrorism. They're interested in funding terrorism. We've now reversed sides in the war on terror. Everybody who we were fighting has at one point or another received American money or guns, including ISIS, right, who are now fighting in Iraq. And both sides of that we're now funding. Right, Iran, we've relieved the sanctions on, so they're taking over the southern half of Iraq, and ISIS is taking over the northern half of Iraq because we funded their allies in the war against Bashar Assad, who, it turns out, we're now going to fund to fight ISIS. So we are now on every side of every issue except the right side, which in that arena of the world is Israel and Israel alone. And that's espionage, and it's a violation of the Arms Export Control Act to boot. The Arms Export Control Act suggests I cannot funnel, if I were to funnel a gun to ISIS, I'd be arrested. If President Obama does it, that's just American foreign policy. Involuntary manslaughter, right? The basic case of involuntary manslaughter, I'm a lawyer, so the basic case for involuntary manslaughter is a 3-pronged test, right? Somebody died, number 1. Somebody died as a result of reckless action, number 2. Number 3, the person who took that reckless action knew it was reckless and could result in death at the time. Okay, those are the 3 elements of involuntary manslaughter. Benghazi, anyone? Leaving no security anywhere in the vicinity, in an area where we were running guns to Syria through Turkey. In an area where the New York Times had reported literally the year before that the entire town was run by Ansar al-Sharia. And surprise, surprise, Ansar al-Sharia was behind the terrorist attack that killed Chris Stevens and 3 other Americans. Right? Who's responsible for that? Hillary Clinton's responsible for that. She's guilty of involuntary manslaughter. She shouldn't be worried about whether she goes to the White House. She should be worried about whether she goes to the big house. Unfortunately, we have an attorney general who would never prosecute anyone for these sorts of violations because he too is a criminal and he too is guilty of involuntary manslaughter, as it turns out. He greenlit the Fast and Furious program. Turns out that you might think that running guns to Mexican drug cartels, with no tags in them, by the way, there were no electronic monitors on these guns. It was widely known inside ATF that when you run guns to the Mexican drug cartels, the only place they're going to show up so that we can back-channel them, backtrack them, and figure out where they were is at crime scenes. This was explicitly known at the ATF at the time. You might think that's reckless. You might think that that might result in homicide, like the killing of a Border Patrol agent, perhaps. And you might be the head of the DOJ. And if you were involved in this, you were probably promoted. Because nobody who's responsible for Fast and Furious has gone to jail. Nobody's really even been fired. How about violation of internal revenue laws? If you or I were to leverage the IRS to crack down on particular folks, we would be put in jail. That's a violation of the Internal Revenue Code itself, 26 U.S. Code 7212 for people who are following. It's also a violation for politicians and for politically motivated bureaucrats to get involved, and this is a violation of the Hatch Act. Right? The Hatch Act prohibits bureaucrats from getting involved in political situations like this and targeting political opponents. It's a violation of law. But it's a phony scandal, according to the President of the United States. You want to know how corrupt and criminal and nasty this administration is? John Eastman runs the National Organization for Marriage. I'm sure some of you know of John. John's National Organization for Marriage is obviously a pro-traditional marriage organization. This administration is anti-traditional marriage. And so the IRS leaked the confidential tax information, including donor information, about the National Organization for Marriage, which is a 501c3, which means their donors are confidential. They leaked their entire donor list to the Human Rights Campaign, which is a gay advocacy group. Now, they used a middleman in order to do this. John's group, National Organization for Marriage, sued the IRS. The IRS acknowledged that they had, in fact, leaked this material and signed over 50,000 of your tax dollars to the National Organization for Marriage. Now, what John did is John said, okay, fine. You know, we'd like to find out who particularly at the IRS did this. Let's trace this back up the chain. Who decided that it would be a great idea to hand over confidential tax information to political opponents? Right? Who decided that that would be a great idea? So they said to Eric Coulter, why don't you prosecute the middleman, right, who had received the confidential tax information and distributed it in violation of law? Why don't you prosecute him? Eric Coulter said, no one will be prosecuted for this. No one will be prosecuted for this. So John said, okay, fine. You're not going to prosecute him. Give him immunity. Because this guy was pleading the fifth. You can only plead the fifth if there is a threat of criminal prosecution. Right? You can't plead the fifth. If you come to me and you ask me if I was cheating on my wife, I can't just say I plead the fifth. That has no relevance. You're not threatening to criminally prosecute me. The Fifth Amendment is only available in situations in which you do not have immunity. So John said to Eric Coulter, go ahead, give this guy immunity, then we can sue the IRS, we can subpoena him, and we can force him to answer questions about where he got this material. And Eric Coulter said, I will not give him immunity. So in other words, he won't prosecute the guy to get the information, and he won't get immunity. He won't give immunity so the guy would give up the information. This is the height of criminality, and it's so blatant. And yet, has anybody outside this room ever heard of the National Organization for Marriage? Can you imagine if the NAACP had sued Bush's IRS, and Bush's IRS had said, yeah, you know what, we discriminated against you, here's a $50,000 settlement. You think that might lead the news for a few nights? But for the Obama administration, it will not even make the back page of the New York Times. How about unauthorized disclosure of information? You're not allowed to leak confidential national security information, and yet this administration has done that repeatedly. This administration has done it 4 separate times with regard to Israeli national security information, sunk Israel's ability to strike Iran. Israel was supposed to use an airbase in Azerbaijan to strike Iran. That was leaked by the Defense Department to the New York Times. Israel was supposed to work with the Saudis to use Saudi airspace to strike Iran. That was leaked by the Defense Department to the New York Times. Israel was behind Stuxnet. That was leaked by the Defense Department to the Washington Post. And Israel was working out agreements with particular groups to go in and try and decapitate some of the heads of the nuclear program. That was also leaked by the Defense Department to the Washington Post. But it's not just Israeli national security information that's being leaked. You know how we all knew that President Obama had his kill list? You know, Rand Paul has been very big on President Obama has his kill list. American citizens abroad who he just decides we can kill. Which, by the way, is, regardless of what you think of the killing of Anwar al-Awlaki, and I'm fine with it. He's a terrorist. He deserved to die. The possibility that we now live in a country where the president can determine, based on which side of the bed he woke up this morning, whether to hit somebody with a drone or trade them for 5 Taliban terrorists is frightening. That should be frightening. Bo Bergdahl was no friend to the United States, according to most reports. And yet he was an American citizen who had to be brought home just in time for the president to quash the VA scandal. He had to be brought home at the cost of 5 top Taliban officials. Because he was an American citizen, he had to be brought home. Well, if his name happened to be Anwar, he'd be dead from a drone strike in Yemen. So the president literally, I mean, that is, if there's anything that speaks to dictatorial power, it is the ability of the president to unilaterally declare who is an American citizen and who is not an American citizen for the purposes of hitting them with a drone or trading terrorists for them. It's not true. It's an unbelievably morally shitty idea. The reason is this. The basic premise of socialism is, I'm here, I'm breathing, give me crap. Right? You have an obligation to care for me. I have a right to health care. I can force that doctor to go to medical school, expend $200,000, spend her entire life learning medicine, and then I can walk into her house and force her to provide me medicine. Right? Capitalism, by nature, is the opposite. Capitalism is the idea that I will starve unless I give you a good or service that you want. Right? If I don't give you something that you want, I'm not going to eat tonight. It's forced altruism, effectively. Right? We have to have a trade. We have to come to some sort of consensus. I have to give you something cool, and you have to give me something cool. Right? It's great. Socialism is rape, and capitalism is consensual sex. Right? The lack of my $100,000 salary, that's because society is mean, and so we have to transform the society. And that's why young people, again, 40% back speech codes in American life. This is why I think the last poll was nearing or over 40% of young people are okay with socialism, like the actual socialism, because they don't know anything. They've been taught stupidity, and how they feel is all that matters. I mean, there's a video that's going around the internet getting all sorts of play about income inequality. Income inequality is the stupidest issue. Income inequality means nothing. Right? I mean, I have a lot of income inequality with Bill Gates, but I'm doing pretty well, and I don't care that Bill Gates is doing really well. The only thing we should all care about is that there are poor people. We should figure out how poor people can do better, not how to make Bill Gates less rich. But this video is going around and saying, here's a poll of what Americans think the wealth distribution should look like, and here is what the wealth distribution actually looks like. And I watched this video in bewilderment, and young people love it. And I watched this video in bewilderment saying, who told you that you get to tell the universe how wealth is distributed? Right? Who told you that you have a moral say as to how wealth is distributed? It's immoral, it's evil, it's wrong. You're going to have to steal people's labor from them. But people are not told this, and so they think that their own subjective vision of what reality should look like should govern what reality actually looks like, and it's only later, after 80 years of communist failure, that they realize, oh, that, and hundreds of millions of people dead, that they realize, oh, that was a bad idea.
Health insurance is an earned benefit. It's not given for free to employees, they earn it. Should your employer be able to decide how you spend your money?
Pay for it yourself.
Hold up. Hold on, 1 second. Earned from whom? Okay, I may think that I earn twice the salary that I get from this radio station. That doesn't mean that I have an earned benefit from the radio station for twice what they're willing to pay me. It's always a consensual relationship.
You pay for your health care?
Well, first of all, I do, because it was negotiated in the contract that I signed, in which I voluntarily engaged. And if I don't like that, I can quit tomorrow. The reality of the situation is that the economy grows because people engage in consensual transactions, and people invent new things in order to engage in more of those consensual transactions. That's not an impoverishing thing. The truth is that socialism is the most selfish philosophy on planet Earth, because it is based on the essential concept that I am breathing, therefore I deserve. Capitalism is, in essence, forced altruism, because if I don't give you something that you want, then I will starve. If I don't give you something that you want, then I will starve, because it is based on consent, whereas socialism is based inherently on force.
I think, as kind of a millennial conservative, constitutional conservative, one of the biggest threats and one of the hardest things to respond to from people on the left is when they talk about the utopia of the Nordic countries, because they are oftentimes armed with a lot of facts in regards to the efficiency of their public programs and things to that effect. So how would you recommend responding to those claims of the utopianism of the Nordic countries?
Okay, so the first thing that's important to notice about the Nordic countries is that the Nordic countries are, by and large, extraordinarily ethnically homogenous. So they're not comparable and culturally homogenous as well. So Vermont looks a lot like Norway. Right? Bernie Sanders' philosophy works in Vermont and it works in Norway, but it only works for a temporary period of time, because Vermont doesn't have its own defense budget, and really neither does Norway. Right? We've been paying for the Nordic countries' defense budgets for a long time. Also, it's worthwhile noting that the taxes in these countries are extraordinarily high, and the countries are going bankrupt anyway. So for about a 15-year period, 20-year period, the Nordic countries have been experiencing extraordinarily slow growth, which has led them to actually elect more right-wing governments on economics and deregulate their economies, because it turns out people don't like paying twice the amount that it costs for a normal car. Right? The income tax rate in places like Denmark for middle-class people, not for upper-class people, for middle-class people is like 60%. So, it's easy for students to say 60% sounds good, but you all go to Yale, which means that eventually you'll have a job that pays you enough that you'll be paying a high percentage of your income in taxes, and it ain't that much fun. There's a reason that Denmark, all these countries are now turning away from this, and they've been living off the back of America paying for their defense budget for a very long time. So you have the privilege of not having to pay your own defense budget. You also have a group of what can best be described as upper education people who have grown up in Western countries with a particular set of values. And socialism, at least in the Nordic way, not full government ownership of resources, but high redistribution of income, that is capable of lasting for a certain period of time, but even there it collapses.
Is an acceptable concept.
Yes. So the problem is that you're arguing with them in terms of the effectiveness of socialism. So what that argument is, you say socialism doesn't work, it fails everywhere, it makes people poor and miserable, right? That's the argument. And then they go, but that's because it hasn't been properly tried, right? That's their comeback. So here is the actual argument that works with socialism. It is immoral to steal from people, even if you vote to steal from people. Okay, if there are 3 people in a room, and it's me, and I have $100, and you and your friend are in the room, and you vote to beat me up and take my money, that does not make it morally legitimate for you to beat me up and take my money. One of the great lies that's been told about socialism, and you see this all the time, is people say socialism, beautiful idea in theory, but it doesn't work in practice. No, socialism is a shitty idea in theory, and it's an immoral idea in practice. Okay? Socialism violates at least 3 of the basic 10 commandments for those who still care. It makes government into God. It suggests that you can steal from people if you vote for it. And it says that it is good to be covetous of your neighbor's ass. Right? For Bill Clinton, it has a different meaning. But The problem for conservatives is we never actually argue on a moral level. We're constantly arguing on an effective level, on an efficiency level. And that's a problem because the left always argues on the moral level. In the end, they always say, sure, my ideas don't work, but they're fair. They're fair, right? And so what you have to say, the only way to come back to that from that is to say, no, your ideas are not fair, your ideas are theft. Your ideas are theft. You don't get to steal from other people just because you want their stuff. That's the only way to beat that argument. Do it on the moral level. Otherwise, they can always argue, well, it's not perfect. It's not perfect. Okay, there's no way to come back from that because, again, they're operating in unicorn land with gumdrop rainbows and fairy skies. And thanks for having me. It's fun to speak in high schools. I normally speak in colleges. It's a rarity I get to speak in high schools. It's also a rarity that public high schools allow me to speak there because typically teachers want a monopoly on what they're allowed to say in the classroom, and typically that represents one particular point of view in the classroom. So it's always fun to sort of present the other point of view. And I'm going to speak for a while, and then I'm happy to take any questions you may have, especially from you Bernie Sanders supporters. I hear there are quite a few of you. Don't worry. Eventually you'll end up paying taxes and get a life. Disagreement. It can be fun. All right, so I want to talk a little bit. I know. Don't worry, you can riot later. I want to start by talking about some of the differences between the left point of view in America and the right point of view in America. And these are very serious differences. These are fundamental differences. It used to be that in the country there was basically one vision of what everybody wanted, and it was just a question of how to get there. Everybody wanted prosperity. Everybody wanted a solid family life. Everybody wanted a basic standard of material wealth. And everybody wanted a stronger America abroad. That seems to have gone by the wayside. There are two very different visions of the universe that are now represented in our political debate. There's one on the left and there's one on the right. And the one on the left is represented, and I think Bernie Sanders is an excellent representative for the American left. I know that wasn't meant as a compliment, but you can cheer if you want. Bernie Sanders is a good representative of the left because Bernie Sanders actually says what most leftists think, as opposed to somebody like Hillary Clinton, who tends to lie about what leftists think because she wants to be perceived as more moderate for a general election crowd. Bernie Sanders is at least honest enough to say what it is that he believes and what most of the American left believes at this point. And I think that actually Bernie Sanders has done a pretty significant service to the American public debate by speaking out in a way that most people in politics are too dishonest to do. So I want to talk about what exactly Bernie Sanders and some folks on the left think, not just in terms of their specific policies, because we all know they want higher taxes and more redistribution of wealth, but what does that represent in terms of actual values, in terms of actual ethics? There are basically four principles that characterize what it means to be somebody on the left in America and in Europe today, and then there are four principles as to what it means to be on the right. And we can discuss whether you think this is accurate or not, but this is my perception of it. And I think that folks on the left would largely agree with this. The first principle that the left represents, the first principle the left stands for is the idea that equal outcome is the only value. Not equal opportunity, equal outcome. The idea being that if you have two people in a room and one person has $10 in their pocket and one person has $2 in their pocket, then obviously something has gone madly wrong. Right? There's been some sort of inequality that has existed, structural inequality, there's been exploitation, there's been victimization. It can't be that the guy who's got $10 in his pocket worked hard for the $10, and the guy with $2 in his pocket didn't provide market services worth $2. Right? It isn't possible that people were differently situated at the beginning, and that the guy with the $10 has never met the guy with the $2. It must be the guy with the $10 must have done something. The system must have been corrupt in some way to allow there to be this vast imbalance. This is why you hear so much on the left about income inequality. And you don't hear a lot about just poor people and how do we help poor people. You hear about income inequality, as though there's something inherently wrong with the idea that some people are rich and some people don't earn as much money. Now the fact is, in all of human existence, there's been income inequality because some people have a better skill set, some people work harder, some people have a skill set and a set of services that they provide that more people want to purchase. Bill Gates provides more to people than the local permanently poor person. He has provided a number of services that people want to purchase. He's engaged in more voluntary transactions. For the left, this isn't a representation of equal opportunity being used differently. This is actually a representation of inequality and unfairness. The left equates inequality with inequity. Right? Inequity means unfairness. Inequality just recognizes a reality, which that everybody is unequal. We all have equal rights. We all have equal access to those rights, but Not everybody is equal. Some people are smart, some people are stupid, some people are tall, some people are short, some people are great at basketball, some people are 5'9" Orthodox Jews who can't jump. Right? There's a lot of inequalities in life. That doesn't mean some inequity has taken place. It is not inequity for the NBA to be largely black. It is not inequity for the NBA to be largely tall. It is not an inequity for the NBA to be largely athletically skilled people. That is the standard for being in the NBA. And it's not inequity for people who are smarter to earn more money if they provide more services to other people and they're not exploiting anybody. But the left believes that just because there are these inequalities, those inequalities have to be rectified by the great God of government. We all have to bow down before the great collective. And don't worry, if one person is poor and one person is rich, all that has to happen is Barack Obama or Bernie Sanders or some other politician comes down from the sky and simply rectifies that imbalance by taking money from one group and giving it to another group. And this has pretty significant ramifications, because the truth is, even folks like Bernie Sanders won't actually say when inequality has been wiped away. Right? If you ask Bernie Sanders, okay, so at what point is there enough income equality that we're okay, he won't tell you. Right? Because the fact is that any sort of inequality is inequality. Unless you're going to go full communist, which even Bernie Sanders isn't willing to do, and say that everybody ought to earn exactly the same amount of money, regardless of the amount of work they put in, inequality will exist. And there was inequality even in places like the Soviet Union. So the fact is that this principle, equal outcome is the only value, it's very troubling, and it also means that we end up siding with some of the world's worst people. Because the fact is that life tends to create a relationship between cause and effect. What you do in your life is going to have consequences. Right? What you choose to do for a career, the choices that you make now, those are going to have consequences. What you do in college, that will have consequences. And those consequences are a natural result. So responsible decisions tend to end with better results than irresponsible decisions. Now, for a lot of folks, they tend to think that you sort of luck into poverty or you luck into wealth. That may be true in rare circumstances, but as a general matter, it is absolutely untrue. If you don't, especially in America, where there actually is tremendous income mobility, people move up and down the income ladder extraordinarily regularly in the United States. Most of the people who are in the top 1% weren't in the top 1% 10 years ago and won't be in the top 1% 10 years from now. There's tremendous income and mobility in the United States. But the fact is that if you believe that there's cause and effect to human action, then you have to believe that inequality is going to exist as a ramification of the fact that if you do certain things, you will be better off, and if you do certain things, you will be worse off. For example, if you don't want to be permanently poor in America, according to the Brookings Institute, if you don't want to be permanently poor, all you have to do is 3 things, and it's good advice for people of your age, okay? Graduate high school, don't have a baby before you get married, and get a job. That's it. You do those 3 things, and you will not be permanently poor in the United States. It's from the Brookings Institute, which is a leftist institution. Cause and effect. But for the left, because they believe equal outcome is the only thing that matters, you should be able to do whatever you want. You should be able to have 10 kids out of wedlock, not graduate high school, and never get a job, and earn the same amount of money as Bill Gates. Because otherwise it's unfair. We have to wipe away all cause and effect relationship in order to achieve this. And what that means is that people who make bad decisions end up being benefited. And this is true both domestically and in terms of foreign policy. Because the truth is that on a foreign policy scale, internationally, countries that are poorer tend to be countries that make really bad decisions about human life. They tend to be countries that don't believe in property rights, don't believe in equal rights, don't believe in liberty. And so those countries tend to be very poor. And that is natural, and that is good, because it incentivizes people to actually pursue liberty, and to pursue decency, and to pursue equal rights. If you wipe away the relationship between cause and effect, you invariably end up siding with the world's worst people. So principle 1 for the left is equal outcome is the only value, not equal opportunity. Whenever President Obama or any other person on the left says what they want is a fair playing field, that's not true. What they want is a fair medal stand. Right? They want everybody on the medal stand at the end of the day, and it doesn't matter if you stink at the game.